Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to Comic Books and Graphic Novels in Focus, which is taking place as part of Forced Migration in the Arts. Forced Migration in the Arts is a monthly online series that brings together people with lived experience of forced migration, artists, academics, activists, and the aim of the series is to create space where people can meet to share ideas and also possibly also explore ways of collaborating. For today's session, we are focusing on graphic novels and comic books, and we've got three speakers. We've got Helen Partook, Santok Gill, and Tracy White. Without more from me at this point, we'll pass on to our speakers who will initially just introduce themselves, talk about what they do, where they do it, how they do it, and why. And then we go into a discussion, unpacking issues around or questions around forced migration, the arts, and also comic books and graphic novels. I think we'll start with we'll go by the order that we had in the program. We start with Helen, and then Tracy, and then Sandro.
Okay, thanks, Ambrose. Shall I just carry on? Okay, well, great to meet everyone. And it was really wonderful to listen in on that former panel. And thanks, Ambrose, for organising such a great, such a great event. It's quite rare, I think, to come across these two subjects combined, graphic novels and forced displacement. So thank you. And it's great to meet the other speakers. Sorry, I have a bit of a flu, so if I'm a bit slow, that's why. So my name's Helen Paddock. I'm a writer and illustrator from the UK. I'm based here in the Southwest, in Somerset. And my artistic medium is watercolour mostly. I work with black ink, watercolour and digital design, mostly on children's picture books, but sometimes occasionally on graphic novels. So I split my time between being a creative consultant to the UN, with whom I illustrate. I use illustration to package psychosocial support on international mental health interventions. So that's mostly on children's books with the WHO and the reference group of the Interagency Standing Committee, which brings various humanitarian agencies together in emergencies. So I mentioned Ambrose, I might share my screen a bit because I think it's easier to sort of demonstrate things visually. And as we're talking about such visual things, and we have the power of Zoom. So right now I'm mentoring some Syrian illustrators who are adapting a story I wrote and illustrated with the Interagency Standing Committee during the pandemic, which is about this magical dragon who helps children travel around the world, helping each other. And this story has actually been adapted by the Syrian national team for the earthquake that affected Turkey and Syria in February of this year. And it's been amazing to see this recreated. So the original story was with this magical dragon traveling around the world with this kind of crack team of kids who teach other children how to be safe and how to take care of each other during COVID-19. And it was translated into over 160 languages. So I really believe in the power of children's books in sharing ideas and packaging important information and caring conversations. So yeah, that's the original there. But most of the time I am the founder and director of Kitabna. So Kitabna means our book in Arabic. It's a non-profit using storytelling practices and creative writing to help children affected by conflict and disaster share their voices and experiences of forced displacement. And this work began in Lebanon with refugees and IDP, that's internally displaced persons, people. And it expanded to Iraqi Kurdistan, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Northern Ireland, and the UK, Libya, and this year in Armenia and Poland. So with this work, I support colleagues remotely, sometimes from here in the UK, and sometimes in person with fieldwork, to establish story writing activities, illustration work, and safe spaces for creative expression with children. So this is in collaboration with various NGOs, and we try to make all of our resources available for free online. So one of the great things about doing that is that anything we co-create with children is always available to them, and it's often available in multiple languages. So one of the series that I think is I'm most happy with is the series that we've been developing over several years with the Norwegian Refugee Council and UNICEF. And it's a series that started in Jordan, in the refugee camp of Zaatari and Azraq. And it's a collection of 5 stories written by teachers, Syrian teachers, reflecting on not just life in the camp, but reflecting on the magical possibilities of life within the camp, in both the camps Zaatari and Azraq. And all of our books are available with audio. So if children are learning English, they can listen to the English, and if they're learning Arabic, they can listen to the Arabic. But yeah, this was the first in a series that then expanded to Our Stories, Our Syria, which was a collection of children's stories written in northern Syria. And this was a series of stories about children living in camps in northeast Syria. So there are IDP camps and reflections of life in the camp, and also what can happen if we make the refugee camp and IDP camp a place of possibility, so a place where life continues, education continues. And then most recently our stories are Libya, which is again, it was co-created with the Norwegian Refugee Council and UNICEF and their non-formal education centres. So this was children experiencing a different kind of forced migration. So coming from very different backgrounds, but meeting in this collective space of the non-formal education centre. So you had mixtures of IDP and refugee communities coming and all colliding in that, as I'm sure many of you know, all coming up to Libya as that place of the next step, or sometimes not the next step, of waiting for that next migration step into Southern Europe, but sometimes getting stuck. So that's a little bit of an overview of me and my work, and I'll pass back. Bless you. And maybe just to say as well, from my own personal perspective, my own family were one of the oldest refugee groups, or my ancestors in history, the Parsi Zoroastrians, who came from Iran, and they fled religious persecution to India and then to the UK. So this is, yeah, I guess a personal and professional project for me. And I also work with many close friends in Katabna who helped me build this project. So yeah, just to explain a bit of the motivation, which I think Ambrose asked for in his questions to us about why we do this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we hear from Tracy next.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Ambrose, for putting us together. Echoing Helen, it's so nice to be able to have an opportunity to learn and to talk with people in a group who are working visually around refugees and immigration. It doesn't happen that often. So thank you for making that possible. I'm a teacher and cartoonist, and my work has always focused on teens and making relatable comics that explore difficult situations in real ways, with the underlying idea that we're all connected through common emotions. You know, we can't walk in someone's shoes, but we can walk next to them. And I really believe that someone can have a very different life, but there will be these moments of connection. I'm the author of Unaccompanied, Stories of Brave Teenagers Seeking Asylum. I don't have I can't do a thing. Oh, my thing is on blur. Oh, well, anyway, Stories of Brave Teenagers Seeking Asylum. And it's about 5 courageous, tenacious teens, as you put into my bio. I think of them as superheroes from 4 different countries who leave their families, their communities, everything they love, to make this very difficult journey to walk to the United States. And then once they're in the US, there's a whole nother journey that happens when the immigration system takes over. And this book came about because I saw a lot of images in the US of children at our borders, but what you saw were people in pain. And it's sort of this deficit narrative that the media was putting out. And I kept thinking, but these kids have to be incredibly strong. And I kept wondering, like, who are their communities and where are they coming from? And, what songs do they like? What books do you like? But when you're, reading these things in the paper or, however you're getting your media, it's just like these poor people. And it was just, to answer that question, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, why did I do this? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I asked a lot of questions, and it ended up leading me to an organization that is in the US called the Safe Passage Project. And they provide nonprofit legal help to unaccompanied refugee minors. Because in the US, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but you have the right to a trial, but not to a lawyer. And it's something like, if you don't have a lawyer, there's less than a 50% chance that your case will win. And if you have a lawyer, it's like over 90%. I mean, it's a ridiculous number. So it's those organizations and the people who work in them are incredibly important. And I ended up working with that organization to do a comic for them about the legal system that was for their clients, that was going to be left in courthouses in English and Spanish. Most of the clients are coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, but of course they're coming from all over the world. And the thing is, when I did that comic and I interviewed the lawyers are actually only interested in the terrible things that happen because that's what's going to win their cases. And I'm still thinking, but who are these kids? And they come from beautiful countries with rich histories, and they have communities, and who are they? I wanted to know more. And so I ended up interviewing. I chose not to interview the children because it was going to jeopardize their cases, and there's the re-traumatization because they're always telling their stories over and over again. And another thing of sort of this power dynamic of being the person interviewing them. So I worked with the lawyers to get the stories, but then because I'm in New York and I am walking next to someone and not in their shoes, I expanded my research to work with people in Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guinea, Africa, because that's where these 5 kids came from. And I would check in with them. I asked them questions. I would write a script. I would send it to people in all these different locations. They would give me feedback. I would change things, and that happened also with the drawing. So it was a real collaboration. And to make this book that I have hoped to get into schools so that people can have a better understanding. It can be a jumping off point and discussion around issues of immigration, migration, refugees, and borders. And all my authors' profits go back to the organizations that support unaccompanied refugee minors.
Thank you, Tracy. How about you, Santo?
Hi, Ambrose, and again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this platform, a really important platform, and I appreciate being put with artists because I'm a sociologist, so that's me coming at it from a different angle. So just to let you know a bit about myself, I'm a sociologist, like I mentioned, and I've been working in and specializing in the field of sort of race and migration for around 20 years now. I know I don't look like I'm doing, but and it's part of that in terms of like research, but also in terms of teaching undergraduates and postgraduate students on those issues. This project in particular comes out of a collaborative work we're doing with Migration Yorkshire, which is one of our community partner organisations for this, and it came out that a number of kind of outputs we've been doing for the last 2 years. We're on our 3rd year so far, and a number of project outputs that have related to sort of things like policy reports, evidence reviews, as well as academic papers and then academic books that come through. And the comic would, in that sense, more of a collaboration that kind of shifted, you know, the academic audience to wider audiences, to kind of have those debates and discussions, particularly about refugees, and the work is very much in this. The comic has been about, and I'm not sure if how much information there is about it, but it's called Transitions, a Story of Refugees. It was done in collaboration with artists from Petroglyph Studios in Canada. So we kind of worked with them with the research material we had, based on real life events, you know, on what came out of the narratives. So by the time we were writing the comic, we'd interviewed around 49 people with refugee experience and those that had gained status, and about 30 stakeholders, people working with them, you know, and it was that kind of basis of kind of telling their story in a way, and to an audience that needs to hear it, you know, because that you know, we really need to change narrative here in the UK in particular. You know, the debates around migration are very polarized. You know, migration is very much seen as a problem, you know, and it was us to trying to get a voice out to shift that concern, that issue, and kind of say, look, you know, migration actually brings with it great opportunities. It brings with it, you know, a whole range of things, and we really need to think differently about it. And that's in many ways is my inspiration as well, inspiration to become a sociologist, to kind of, you know, inform people, bring in the kind of insight for whether it's students in the classroom or whether it's, you know, practitioners I'm talking to, of what's going on out there. You know, just don't present a more kind of in-depth view of the problem there. And it has informed me, you know, my parents came here from the Indian subcontinent, you know, and, you know, that's informed my thinking, the inequalities they experience, you know, the lack of opportunities there. And, you know, and sociology has given me that platform. And then I suppose the research, and particularly this project we've worked on, has allowed us to kind of find another way to kind of shift those narratives as well.
So maybe we start with that, with those narratives. Helen and Santok, you are in the UK. Tracy is in the US. What is happening? What is the prevalent discourse, or what are the prevalent discourses on forced migration, refugee issues, and why do you think they are like that? We'll start with Santok, and then Helen, okay, and then Tracy.
Hi, yeah, thank you again, Ambrose. Yeah, it's migration. I mean, in terms of the system we have and the concerns is that system. We have issues in terms of where people come here, you know, to kind of, you know, due to a range of different social, economic, political, or cultural reasons, you know, and since the 1990s, we've kind of seen a whole range of conflicts out there in places like Bosnia, Afghanistan, Syria, just to name a few, and other places that we don't often hear about because the media doesn't feel that's important. But then the media play on that, and just the narratives out there, the language out there creates a polarization. and language is really important here, and hence, you know, our platform in terms of the comic is to kind of shift that language, because it kind of problematizes those that are here for different, you know, for a range of different reasons, to seeking sanctuary as a problem. You know, we spoke to people that came through both schemes, you know, particular pathways, as well as those that came through the asylum route. The asylum process itself, you know, it dehumanizes people, you know, and is that concern of dehumanization that we have a real problem with, you know, is that form of othering that's taking place, you know, and people aren't seeing, you know, the lived realities, they're not knowing those stories, and we see discourses out there that kind of categorize people as undeserving or deserving, you know, and that's at play here as well. And when they gain status, and the majority of people do, the difficulties don't stop, you know. And our focus is very much, my focus in particular has been on housing, in our research, and the difficulties there. But you know, I'll let Helen, sorry, go on from that, but I'll stop there. But
no, that's really great to have that perspective from you, Santok, because I think you know, you said you've put it very, very well, like this kind of, I think, polarized mentality, and also sort of does seem to be, yeah, pretty endemic at the moment. And I think the issue of housing is really actually important. So I deal mostly with education authorities when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. I do some work with the Little Library in Bristol, which is the University of Bristol project, which provides a small multilingual library in an area of Bristol where they call it a micro campus. It's in an area of Bristol where there's a large Somali population. And I was thinking I really want to get Zaina's book for it, because there's some young teenage Somali girls there who are brilliant writers who are going to love that book. And I wonder if we could even get her to come and speak there. So again, you've got this kind of question of, yes, status, and you know, different people who have had different roads or pathways into UK. So my major projects have been with people who've been resettled under the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. And again, you know, on the one hand, that's the kind of golden package, because you've been resettled. In a way, those more kind of bureaucratic details are dealt with, but the support that you receive when you arrive here in the UK, it's not everlasting. You know, it's often for the first 6 months you're offered everything: get kids into school, introductions to work possibilities, language lessons, but then it sort of disappears. And I think we've seen quite an ugly and very different approach to how different refugee groups are treated in the UK. Since 2018, I've been working with Syrian families who've been resettled under the UK Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme in Northern Ireland. And I think the ways in which many families, Afghan families, for example, have been living in hotels for so long, and Syrian families too, is really shocking. And there's been a real difference in, I think, in different responses to different refugee groups coming. For example, for Ukrainian people, there was a very different response, even nationally, sort of at a public level. So yeah, I think it's a difficult time, but I also want to emphasize that there are amazing initiatives going on all over the UK. And, you know, I often say this to people as a British person, you know, it's not the actions of the British government don't represent the actions of many everyday people. And I see, even in my tiny small community in Somerset, an amazing group for English for ESOL, like English for speakers of English as a second language, bringing Kurdish, Turkish, Syrian women together to learn English every week. And I just see lots of beautiful initiatives of people supporting newcomer and refugee communities as well. So I think there's like this kind of frightening, big, terrifying polarizing going on. But I do also think there are lots of people working really hard to make the UK, or try to remake or reimagine the UK as a place of refuge for people coming. And also support for unaccompanied minors. There's lots of people doing really beautiful work, either as social workers or as volunteers, for that really vulnerable group of, often young men and teenage boys who come here alone, and often just put somewhere not very appealing. So yeah, I think it's one of those things. I'm sure in the States as well, it'll be really interesting to hear from Tracy about that. We have lots of small things going on that people aren't really talking about, and then the bigger picture, which is terrifying.
Yeah, I can definitely thank you, Helen. there's that bigger picture, and it ties a little bit into Santok, what you were saying, which is language. And I don't in the United States, often in the press, you hear words like aliens or illegals, or it's just like caravans, and all these words really serve to dehumanize people, and you almost don't see a person. It's just like some mass. It's very hard to think that there are people behind those words. And my hope is also that language changes, because it can be so hurtful. And at the same time, on the smaller level, Helen, and I'm in New York City, so there are, of course, a lot of nonprofits that are doing things, but there are also very small grassroots things where people are coming to airports and picking people up, or figuring out. I worked for a while with a group in San Diego. San Diego is right on the border of Mexico, so there's a lot happening right there. And there's this group, it's literally 2 people. And they collect stuff in San Diego. They bring it down to shelters in Mexico. When they're in San Diego, they get calls from people who are getting released from detention centers in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. They don't speak English. They don't know what they're doing. And they get this phone number, and these people come and they pick them up and they bring them to a hotel, and they get them food and they give them clothing. And then they get them miles and put them on planes and get them to the places they need to go. And there are stories like that everywhere. There are lots of groups also, again, more along the borders of Texas, with Mexico and Texas and California, that try and go out into the deserts and leave water and supplies for people who might be trying to come in different ways. And then there's also people coming through and slashing the water and taking the things. So it's, it is like this give and take. And I am certainly not an expert in why people are leaving. There are so many different reasons, because that was part of what you were asking. There's the intergenerational trauma, there's climate change, there's colonialism, there's so many things. And I just really see it as, how can we humanize these stories? And graphic novels are such a wonderful way to do that, because they do take these very complex ideas and boil them down and make them digestible, and make it easier for people to see themselves maybe in similar situations, or recognize details about things. And they're like, oh, I have that, thing that I see in the background. I have that in my room, or I have something similar. And it is, I think that being able to humanize people and make people realize aliens and illegals are actually people or children, in the case of the things that I'm doing, who leave their families under duress, who take these very dangerous journeys to get here, who have this kind of agency, and then come to the US and the immigration system takes over. They don't have as much agency. And then, to Helen's point, you kind of get into, there's a lot that happens in support, but in your early 20s, it sort of leaves. I think you mentioned something along those lines. But I think if we can change how people see refugees and migrants, and instead of defaulting to the dehumanizing language, it would make a huge step to making a difference in how things happen and how they can be supported.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. And also one of the things that we spoke about in the last session was how there's a mismatch between the discourses that are coming from governments and also mainstream media, and those that are coming from communities, from the grassroots, where governments and mainstream media are really, really hostile towards refugees. But at a community grassroots level, the support is just it's just there. It's solid. I don't know. Do you find the same things happening in the UK and in the US? And also, how do you explain that almost like that split, Tracy?
I mean, I think maybe Helen said this, people aren't the government. And you know, everyone, I think, needs reminders all the time, all over the world. There's things happening, and the governments are doing things that may not be what the people want to do. And so they go and try and make a difference. And it's amazing what people can do together in small groups, even on their own, to make change and make a difference.
How about you, Helen and Sandro?
Yeah, I think it is really hard. I think there is that just really basic fact that I think Tracy spoke about it just now. You know, when this whole sort of like dehumanization process is so powerful, and it's the cause of the worst things that happen, you know, to humanity. I think it's one of the things that enables genocide. And I think that the fact is that when you're faced with another human being in your local supermarket or in your town, and you see them struggling to speak English, or you hear about, you know, a nice group of people who get together and eat cake and are just getting to know each other because they're trying to make a welcoming space. It's just people being people. And I think there's also this sort of weird, and I understand it on some level, if people have never left their country, or if they've never left their village or their city, or they're in their neighborhood, they might stay in this loop, or stay with this understanding that if someone is a refugee or foreign, or somehow, you know, asylum seeking, that it's only you who could offer them something, and it's not them who could offer you something. And I think so often there's beautiful, I mean, this is the experience of many people, I'm sure, certainly mine, you know, some beautiful friendships and creative collaborations, and, you know, wonderful, meaningful connections you can have with people if you take away those sort of labels. And I think maybe at that highest level, where you have people making policy, you know, creating policies, and I do think there is just a disconnect. But right back at that, you described that really beautifully as well, Ambrose. You know, that kind of solid line of, it's where people are just people. Of course, we see each other as humans, because we're social creatures. I believe, I do believe in, yeah, this great human capacity we have for kindness, of seeing kin in each other. And I think so often that comes with contact, and it's what we're experiencing it on a big level at this moment, I think, is disconnect, because yeah, I think it's very easy to hear a narrative about someone or anything and just be like, yeah, instead of actually having to be faced with the person in front of you and have a human interaction. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Helen? How much do you think social media plays into all of that?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I think it's huge. I think it's like everything, isn't it? Social media is, on the one hand, it can be a weapon. On the one hand, it can be the most beautiful way to connect with people. And we see it in all things. Like we see it as a tool for truth telling in conflict now. Like there's no, I think it's post-truth warfare or something, that we live in an age where actually anything can be captured. I don't know, I think the jury's still out on social media and what it's going to really bring the human race, but I think it's definitely changed the way we see each other. But like all our tools as humans, whether they're weapons, technologies, language, I think it's how we choose to use them. So yeah, what do you think, Tracy, about social media and Santok? and Ambrose.
Start with you, Tracy. Yeah.
Don't start with me. I don't know. I'm really I think it can be really devastating, and there's so much disinformation now, and it feels like, you know, that people are spouting things that are not necessarily based on truth, but then they get accepted very quickly as truth, and it's so hard to parse out for many people what is real and what isn't real, and it's really dangerous, and it's almost like, you know, everyone has to learn now a little bit more about how to question what's going on. It's like should be part of, I feel like part of how you approach everything is like, I have this series of questions and I'm going to think about what this information is and how do I actually really interpret it, and before I actually take it in and, you know, just hit click and like repost it or do something like that. It's so easy to do that. And I also think it, in a way, it can also very quickly dehumanize people, as we know. Like there's a lot of hate, and I mean, there's also the community. I'm focusing on the negative things because I've just seen so much recently, unfortunately. But there is, of course, also the beautiful things that happen in the way that people can communicate and show their stories and what's going on. So it can be powerful that way as well. Santok, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I think I'll use the word community because that was one of the things you said, and I think that in terms of, even with when we've done our research, is like you said, it's horrible times at the moment. It's really, there's a lot going on, and again, at the moment, there's just a lot of anger out there as well, and I think sometimes we need to hold on to things, and community provides that in many ways. In terms of the stuff, in terms of what our comic did, it tried to depict that idea of community in terms of locations. So we looked at sort of different communities getting together. Well, what we define as community has a lot of areas of belonging and spaces of belonging. And I think what social media, in terms of our research, has done, what highlighted is, in terms of when we looked at refugees navigating their way around, it was social media that was a method of community that to help support each other's housing pathways and find out where to get support. So social media played a useful role in that, in one sense. But like you said, it can also be used as a method of hate. You know, that seems to be one of those things. But I mean, I was talking to the Hugh, who one of the artists we worked with on this, and he said, and I talked about some of the kind of processes involved in it, and he, in a way, this was a community. Our project came out that the voices of the refugees we spoke to, the community researchers and organisations involved with us, and the art and ourselves coming together, and he talked about it as very much as an act of solidarity, and that's an important thing to put here. Is a form of solidarity. And he said what he was saying to me is like the very much the construction of the production of the comic was an act of solidarity. It was like us doing it together, and it also reflected people coming together, you know, to support each other. And I think social media in that sense can bring people together. So if it's about social media, community and all that, it can bring people together, but it can also, like we say, polarize debates and discussions as well, in that context. But I mean, like I said, that our research focused on housing. To kind of have a sense of belonging, to have a sense of community, housing is, again, going back to it, really important. Where you live, not just the areas you live in, but the communities you have access to, but also having a sense of belonging in the communities you live in. So I suppose solidarity is important, I think, and a sense of community. And if we leave it on social media, I suppose social media can both support it and challenge it in that sense.
And also, Santok, what do you make of this split between what is happening at what is coming from states and also from mainstream media, and how there's a disconnect between that and reactions, responses at a community level.
I mean, it's a complex. I mean, it's a complex picture. I think certain media sources, project that kind of concern that the migrants, the migrants are a problem. They are a threat to our nation. It's that nationalist discourses, and that's happened from the post-war period. And you know, I mean, Tracy mentioned the word alien. You know, our first Immigration Act was the Alien Act in 1915. I think, you know, that was that language and discourse is there. I think at the same time, we've got to be careful because there are also initiatives that support people. You know, there are also initiatives that will help in terms of the pathways into housing, help that process of integration that come from the top. But again, they can be squeezed. But at the other level is a lot of the people we spoke to also talked about key people, individuals, whether they're involved in grassroots organizations, whether they're doctors or they're nurses or support workers or caseworkers that helped at different points, you know, whether they helped in terms of just sort of talking about, here's this college course that you might want to do, or whether it was just to kind of, you know, have someone to talk to for 5 minutes or just sort of walk with. So that kind of having somebody there is very important. And I think the role of grassroots organizations, you know, is really important, particularly when there's an entrenchment of the state intervention, you know, where there is a kind of clawing back of the state. And the problem is there becomes more gaps as well, you know, as you know, that you know, we do find of people inevitably are living in poverty, increasing numbers. What needs to be done is to kind of more of a language of shared humanity as well, you know, I think here of a shared experience and disempowerment for a number of different groups, including refugees. But I think, like you said, there is that kind of, there is those people at grassroots level as well, at individual, at community level that will do things. And the other thing in our research as well, beyond the comic, is, you know, people, particularly people from refugee backgrounds, will help other people. You know, there's a lot of involvement in community organizations and, you know, going back and helping, supporting other people that are in the same situation. And there's a lot of empathy there, you know, and that's really important to kind of put into perspective here as well.
And then one thing that that Tracy mentioned was how when young people get into the asylum system in the US, and then they transition out of that, there's almost like a shock, a change. You know, can you say something more about that, Tracy?
You know, I can't say that much about it because I really was focused on the unaccompanied minors who are going through the legal system now, and most of them were under 18. And one that I'm still in touch with, she's actually part of a very special program, and she's actually being supported. And she's in her 20s, but I don't think that is so typical. I just have this sense from a few of the other people I know who are now 28, 29, that it becomes, it is like, well, what happened? I had all this support and now I don't. And but they do have, as we've been talking about, support from their communities, and they're trying to figure things out. And there are grassroots organizations that try and band-aid over things and smooth it out. But it's also, for us in the United States, I don't know, in the UK, we have a foster care system, and it like helps people, but then at some point you get jettisoned out, and it's like, oh, you're an adult now and see you later. But I mean, even adults need that help. And I certainly think it is something that needs to be addressed, and something else that probably needs to be addressed. And I saw with the stories that I had, and it's something, Helen, you touched on. I don't know how you said it, social something, but we say social emotional, and there's like a social emotional component for certainly for unaccompanied minors coming here, and there's a lot that they have seen and heard and experienced at a very young age, and having the ability to process that whether it's maybe through like workshops, which can be beautiful, like writing workshops, or it's having someone to talk to. There's not that many, for example, Spanish speaking therapists in the system. So it's like, it's all these, I think I'm digressing off of what you said, but yeah, I think I totally digressed. I apologize, but I just was thinking about there's this also the emotional component that people carry with them when you're worrying about housing, when you're worrying about all these different experiences and being able to process it. And I don't know in the UK if there's a component that addresses those things as well. I'm curious.
How about you, Helen? What are you finding around young people's experiences of immigration, asylum, forced migration?
Well, first to say, Tracy, no digressions are bad. I think it's always good just to hear where these conversations go. So I guess psychosocial support is the element I was kind of talking about, and I mean, I don't think it's particular to the whole of the UK, but the work that I've done for the last few years has been with the Northern Ireland Education Authority, and they receive their funding from the Home Office, and it's specifically to support families resettled under the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. And the first project we did was very much about creating a bilingual graphic novel, which didn't really have a psychosocial. The element was more the element that it had. The element that it was trying to focus on was this kind of almost like, what do we like shared ground? Like, what do we all have in common? And I'll share my screen for a sec. As well to say that this was like Zaina's book earlier, where you have that kind of, where you have that element of a book where you've got it in two languages, but in Arabic. So if we start a book in English, we would read from left to right, but if we start a book in Arabic, we would read from right to left. So this way we would read backwards like this, and then in English we can read this way. So the whole story is about basically a lamppost who sees, so I'll go back to the beginning, at the lamppost at City Hall, who basically sees a girl being abused, and her light goes out because she's already living in Northern Ireland, which is a part of the UK contentiously that has its own history of sectarian violence. So you have children being resettled who are coming from conflict into a place that already has these kinds of legacies of violence. Even on the streets, you have lots of sectarian flags around. Anyway, so in the story, it's all the different lampposts from all over Northern Ireland. I'm sorry. Basically, sorry, the Zoom thing's in the way. I'm just leave you guys there. Yeah, they basically tell stories from different streets all across Northern Ireland about stories of cross-cultural friendship that they've seen. And then the next stage of our project was therapeutic stories. So I'll go back to our website, and that was working with child educational psychologists to address those psychosocial support needs of the children. So children who are experiencing many things, and there are interesting ways, I think, if you're working with children to establish what those things are. Where's my Safari? Here we go. Oh yeah, sorry. So if I just go back to Because having a website, yeah. So one of the things that we worked on was this therapeutic stories series. There we go. And in this series, oops, sorry, I can't quite get it with my. Yeah. So what we did is we interviewed children, and we interviewed their parents, and used focus groups to find out what they were afraid of, to establish the kind of fears that we could address, and the things that they were experiencing, such as grief, separation, and difficulty trying new things. And then we could use that to kind of create stories. And it was quite interesting because some of the children one of the things that we noticed was that children were dealing with all these different kinds of separation, anxiety, separation from the homeland, but also separation from loved ones. And I think there's actually really amazing processes you can use. Just a simple, it's just almost like interviewing the readers that you want to reach, and then whether you're the writer, so as I'm a writer and illustrator, I often incorporate these things into both elements of work. So obviously, if you're illustrating, you could work with a writer or work with the children themselves to create stories that try and address some of these issues. But long story short, just to say, I think those more psychosocial elements are addressed when you have a project like that, where you have you kind of have the whole machine. You've got the whole. You've got people who are. You've got an intercultural education service. Wow, that's amazing. That's a department within an education department, looking at how these children are being integrated into schools. They've got access to. They can request funding to have child educational psychologists working with them, and they can propose creative interventions. They can also propose all sorts of programming. So all of that to say, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the UK, but I would say that's a really great model of how you can have an education department actually investing in having an intercultural education services program, and then also making sure that part of that has a focus on what we would call MHPSS, so mental health and psychosocial support services. But and perhaps Suntalk can speak more to this, not all schools, not all education departments, they're actually all different all across the UK. So not all of them will have that same thinking. Also, it's very much dependent on the head teacher of a school, whether or not he will allow for these initiatives. But basically, it can be done really well. And these creative interventions and work with any vulnerable people can incorporate a psychosocial element, as long as there's that thinking that goes into the work.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose what in terms of the research we did, we didn't speak to any sort of young children, but at the same time, because of the research covered the last 30 years, some of the people that we did speak to, particularly who came from Bosnia, had been young children at school, and listening to now are adults with their own families, and what was interesting, similar to what you said, Helen, it was often they did talk about either teachers in their colleges or in their schools that were really innovative, that kind of worked in was I mean, they used words like multiculturalism, really wanted to kind of have that kind of creative, integrating aspects of their teaching life, and they did really support them as young people. At the same time, those young people that when they were young people and now are parents themselves, they did talk about the way in which in many ways they took on a lot of responsibilities for their parents. So when their parents had their doctor's appointment, they were the translators because they were learning English a lot quicker. They were the ones that took them for, to help them fill in their forms for housing. They became the kind of almost like support worker as well for the parents. So it's a complex intergenerational relationship, and it's something that I've seen myself as a second generation Asian, similarly played a similar sort of role as for my own parents, and you become a carer in a different way, and because you translate, you help support as well. So we did sort of look at that, see that generational difference, and not as much support in terms of ESOL lessons for the adults as they are now, but there was, because the kids were integrated into schools, they did get involved, they did get that kind of language intervention as well. So whilst our research didn't look at children, they did reflect on them when they were younger. But at the same time, we do sort of see with the schemes, in terms of the different pathways people have migrated. You do have support workers also playing a really important role as coordinating school places, and that continues to happen, working with the schools now and kind of getting those and young people integrated into the school environment. But again, part of that's also about where the migration occurs, which area and environment now, how used to those areas are to kind of dealing with new migrants as well. That's a role to play, and then if they are, there's going to be more support and intervention by the schools as well, I believe.
Thank you very much. And then going back to graphic novels and comic books themselves, why are they important? What can they do for or around discourses on forced migration, refugee issues, children's issues, unaccompanied minors, housing for refugees and asylum seekers? What can they do? We start with Tracy and Helen, and then come to you, Santo.
Hi, sorry about that. Well, I think graphic novels can do a lot. That's the medium that I've always worked in. They're wonderful for reaching people and for connection. It's something I mentioned earlier, where you can take these very complex ideas, immigration, migration, borders. There's really complex. There's so much, and if there's a big book, it could be hard for people to actually get into it. But if you can, the beauty of a comic is that you're distilling down the ideas to their most salient points, and then you're combining them with images. So you have very few words and images to create these ideas. And to do that, you have to simplify, but it's actually quite complex, and it just makes it very digestible. And it gives you these kind of small bite-sized things to digest. And people can see themselves in the visual details. Not necessarily, again, it's not that you can be, you're not that person, but there might be something that is in the background that you can relate to, that there's some other way of helping people to have compassion and empathy for someone that they didn't have before. The idea, I think, that we've all been talking about is you need to humanize. Everything gets so dehumanized. That comic that Santok did, I was looking at it. It's beautiful. It's this long scrolling comic that really helps people understand what's going on in the lives of this family as they're navigating everything. And it's just the beauty of the comic that it can literally draw people in a way that they might otherwise just walk on by. And because you are dealing with a visual medium, the choices of colors, the panel shapes, the choice of the font, that all helps in underscoring whatever the emotion is or the type of story that you want to tell. So the reader doesn't even necessarily realize, but perhaps the palette is in blues, and that elicits a certain type of emotion, and then it's in yellows, or then it's in reds, or the lines are thick, or they look like the font looks like it's handwritten, and that feels more personal, and instead of like a serifed font that you might see in a newspaper. And there's just all these things that you can communicate visually that you don't have to say, but people take in. And that's like just the beauty of the comic is how that gets used. And if you then think about the audience, if this is for young children, maybe the way I do the people is rounder or softer. And if it's for adults, it may look like this. And if I want people to relate more, maybe the way that I draw something, it has some detail, and yet it can also be, there's someone named Scott McCloud who talks a lot about comics and visual communication. The thing that you can do with comics is if you simplify enough, then it's almost like it's an empty vessel. And so people can put themselves into it. but there is the, so it depends on the choice of the creator. Like, how much do you want people to feel like they are that person? You can do that by the amount of detail you put into that person. The more detailed a person is, or the objects are, the more it is an other. And the more kind of expansive and simplified they are, the more it could be anything. It could be an object in my room. It could be me. So there's all these different tools in the toolbox of the graphic artist to help the story along in a way that you can't do in traditional print.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Tracy. I think you just demonstrated as well how much care goes into, artwork generally. It's a very careful and caring act. Yeah, and I think there is something really, like you said, there's something very universal, I think, in not necessarily children's books or graphic novels or per se, because so many different cultures and countries have their own kind of like forms of storytelling, but I do think cartoons, there is something, I think, because in the way they've been globalized, there is something very universal about cartoons. And I don't know what it is, as you say, like about the roundness of the characters, or there's something in them, I think, that is somehow not human. I was trying to write about it earlier in preparation, like it's almost like distant and intimate, that kind of reaction I think people have. And I think it's something that appeals across generations. That's my feeling about the sort of power of, I guess I'm more in the children's picture book world. But I think there's that kind of element of, like, I've always thought of it as a bit of a vehicle. So, when an adult sees a children's book, sometimes they're completely enthralled because they're taken back to childhood, or those cartoons they might have seen growing up. And then when a child sees a children's book, they obviously see like this new world. And it's something, I think it's a space where different generations can come together on the page. You can also recreate those kinds of dynamics, of kind of safe spaces. And I've had the loveliest experiences where families have actually come together around books. And I think that's also something we don't talk about enough, like that idea of actually in some places, if you live in a camp and you don't have access to any TV or media, maybe you have your phone, coming together around a picture book or a graphic novel or pictures that everyone can pore over almost at the same time is actually a really beautiful shared activity. So I think it will continue to have, and it's like, I think both of you have talked a bit about this collaborative element of the sort of the graphic novel. I know Santok was talking about that sort of the idea of bringing the kind of community that comes around the comic as well. And I think it is really powerful. Sometimes it can be done with just one person, but so often it's so many threads that go into the creation of these pieces of work. And I think it does speak to something beyond language as well, beyond preconception. And although we might still consider it a predominantly Western form, I think it's something that exists across different cultures in different ways. So yeah, I would echo the kind of the humanizing element of the kind of graphic novel form. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of sun here. I'll go over to you, Santa.
I thank you. Both of you, I think, for me, have really highlighted the importance, really, of the arts and storytelling. And it's lovely to hear you both talk about it with such passion and with such emotion, because it is something that we need to do. We need to tell these stories, and we need to get out, and the arts are so important for it, and storytelling so important for it. And that's really it, because in many ways it's provided for us, for me as a sociologist, a researcher, it's provided a language to speak, provide a platform for other voices, to speak, and it go beyond the audience is often what academia is. You know, sometimes it's you're already preaching to the converted. You're already people are already reading, you know, literature or policy or reports based on things they're interested in or what they need to do for their job. This goes beyond that, because it's about, you know, maybe having that platform for somebody to look at and go, oh yeah, I can see how there's me in that comic. That's a bit like, you know, my friend Santok, he was like that, you know. That's him playing football, although I've never been good at football, but you know, it was him. It allows them that identification. For younger people in particular, I think is useful. And again, I think it also provides a shift away, a narrative, a platform away from, you know, maybe those that are reading for a purpose or those within an academic audience, to kind of influence social change. You know, you know, Edward Said talks about this as the era of you know, the refugee, and this is true. This is the way in which national boundaries about, you know, people are facing some horrific periods of time, you know, particular groups, individuals. You know, you talked about ourselves, that we're tied to that, you know, and it brings that story for younger audience in particular, which we hope to kind of just get some insight into it, to grapple with some of those everyday interactions and the importance of it. So I think that platform's really important to it. And I think the insight you share, and you've both mentioned in terms of the importance of arts and the importance of storytelling, is another platform to do that. I think that's really important.
I have one more thing to say that's a little bit about the visual storytelling. And it was, I don't know, Sam, talk when you were talking, I was like, oh, I think there's something that as the responsibility you have as a visual artist, especially when you're drawing something that is not your culture, is you can't just draw it. You actually have to work with people who are looking at it. If you can't go to the place, it's not just because there's all these implicit biases. And even if we have the best intentions, unless we have someone to check in, we may draw something that we think is perfectly benign, but is actually giving a different message. And visual images are so powerful. I talked earlier about how I had partnerships with people in different countries, and that was really important. I had maybe 7 different people look at every different panel in my book, one from the country, one a legal expert, all these different people. And there was a girl, one of the stories is about a girl who is from a small village in Guatemala in the north, and she loves books. And so I had drawn her reading, leaning against something with her knees up and reading a book. And when I sent it to the women in Guatemala who had shared lived experiences, they all said, but we would never sit that way. She should be wearing a skirt and her knees should be to the side. And so, you know, of course I went and I changed that. And there were small things like that over and over again where I thought I was doing something, and you can't just you can look at a million images on Google or wherever, but unless you really, especially when you're working and you're trying to tell someone else's story and not your own, the importance of really checking in, not just on language and everything, but because you're in a visual medium, how you're depicting things. Like another comment for a different story was like, there's not enough food on the table. You know, there's more things in the background. You made it too clean, over and over again. And it's the responsibility of the artist or the writer or the artist to make those changes. So you really have to take that into consideration and make sure as you're doing things that you are in community with everyone else, so that you're presenting the story and the people in a light that reflects who they are.
Thank you very much. I don't know, do we have any questions? Does anyone have a question? If you've got a question, if you can unmute and put your question to the speakers. If there are no questions, we go back to our speakers. And I suppose, is there anything in all that did you have a question, Kate, or?
I did. Would that be
Yeah.
all right?
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you, Ambrose. Thank you, everyone, and thank you. It's really exciting and interesting to hear you all, and it makes you drop into another depth, I think, with all the discussion and being able to be a recipient and listen to that. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the political potential of the artworks that you have created, and also the machination between engaging and embedding those within the communities that you are working with, or whether or not it's a vehicle therefore for us now to take forward. How much do we therefore embed that within communities and their responsibility, and or if you feel that they have that, and what the political roads forward might be for these kind of pieces that you've created. And thank you for those who were able, particularly Helen, the way you shared it was just, it's been beautiful to be able to see it. And I also work on these things, and I was trying to join this to learn how to share online the way you have done. So thank you for that.
Who wants to start? Okay, we'll start with Santok and then Helen and Tracy.
Okay. Hi, Kate. You okay? I think you know, there's 2 points I want to kind of bring on what Tracy sort of said as well, because I think that was really involved in this process. To be honest, there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of dialogue, and that's really, really important. I think there is a lot of dialogue, but I think it needs, you know, in terms of a project, I think that in some ways it is a responsibility for us to kind of, I suppose, as an academic, to go beyond academic audiences, but to influence these generations out there to kind of change that narrative. So in that sense, it is a political, it has a political purpose, Kate. Is that what you're sort of saying in that sense? We need to kind of shift, need the, you know, I still remember my eldest saying after the Brexit vote, you know, at a school he went into assembly and everyone's cheering, and he was upset. You know what there are voices out there, there's, you know, discourses out there that are shaping, you know, minds, and I'm not saying we do that, but we need to have counter narratives. You know, there needs to be a way of doing it, and I suppose the promotion of these either in schools, which I think is really important, you know, having them, you know, just as the same way we had those kind of decolonize your bookshelf campaign, we need to kind of have these in school libraries. We need to have them on people talking about these issues within the classroom. But we also, I suppose, we need to have a debate and discussion, and people to kind of express themselves in different ways, but and get an insight. At the same time, I think, you know, the other thing I'm thinking, it needs to be there available. You know, it needs to be made available in as many ways as possible on a free, you know, whether you're walking in a cafe or you walk getting your hair done, there's something there for you to look at. So these comics in many ways allow you to do that in a way. It's just, I suppose, it's the cost and funding as well that's tied into these things. But I think there is a need to kind of, in one ways, I hope that is going to what you were kind of asking, Kate. I'm not sure if I quite said it appropriately, but I think that, for me anyway.
I'll follow on from that, Santok, and thanks, Kate, for your really kind words. I think it's one of the greatest things about Zoom is being able to share things online, and I wish, Tracy, we could see your book, and Santok, I've already had a look at yours, but maybe in the end we can share our resources on the chat as well, if anyone has it online, just because I know on Zoom it's blurry. But yeah, one of the good things we learned from the pandemic. So I think it's a really interesting question, because I guess coming from yeah, and reflecting a bit of what Santok said earlier, sometimes it's really hard if you work in a field with lots of policymakers or very technical colleagues, like the humanitarian field. It is really hard sometimes to take maybe more creative work seriously, and I think sometimes people are like, be like, children's books, or okay, I'm not sure how cartoons can help here. And then you have to demonstrate, and it takes years to build that kind of trust. But I think also what comes with working sometimes with vulnerable people is maybe that kind of need for neutrality. And I find that quite difficult when you're working, like I've worked in Gaza, I've worked in Israel as well. Like I find sometimes a lot of the things that come up in horrendous times like this really tricky, because people feel very, very strongly. And I'm a pacifist, and I find it really hard. I would say that I practice the politics of peace. And I really like the idea also of like a queer politics, so a politics that challenges it challenges the mainstream. You can make of yourself and make of your art something that in itself challenges people and challenges the way people think. So I think what we have to be careful with politicizing, especially maybe more children's books, is the history of children's literature and how it has been used in the past as a political tool. And I think we have to be really conscious of what we're doing when we're using narratives with children, and especially the associations with horrendous regimes in the past, and how still actually illustrated resources can be used to indoctrinate and groom children. So I'm really conscious of that. But I really also believe in the power of, like I said, we all, I think, when people say like, oh, I'm not political, or I often have to say to people, Kitabna is, we have no political affiliations, which is true. But I also think we all have a politics. And I think there's nothing wrong as well with aligning, with trying to work out what that politics is for you. And I think this kind of creative work that tries to reach across divides, tries to reach across reach across huge polarizing challenges that we see today, and doing that in caring, compassionate, kind ways, and trying to reach something in us all that is something that can meet on the same page, something human, something that wants actually peaceful coexistence. It is in itself a political act. So I want to say that, but I also want to say, and I'll share my screen again as you liked it. So I have this like bit of blue sky thinking concept with Kitabna. It's a concept of a solidarity series, and I don't know if anyone's interested in getting involved. I still don't 100% know what it's going to look like, but the concept is, let me find it. So, oh no, yeah, here. So it's on the Kitabna website. But the idea is that it's like, how can we use a story? So my friend Zainab grew up in Shatila refugee camp, and basically she told me her life story, and it was in a conversation we were having around solar energy in Lebanon, and how in Shatila, which is a long-standing Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, how much it would help with the electricity shortages to have solar energy. And we were basically talking about how we could potentially, how much it would cost to have solar panels in one house and actually live in the whole camp. And we did this kind of blue sky thinking about it. And I had this idea of what would it be too much of a political thing for Kitabna to, for example, create a campaign like this, Make of Yourself a Light, where basically we hear Zainab's story from basically growing up in Shatila, surviving the Sabra and Shatila massacre. So I made some illustrations to go with her story, her text, and then working to support her dad, going through her education, getting a degree, and then teaching children. And then when she lost her job, in the change in labor laws, which happened at the same time as the Lebanese Revolution in back in, it would have been 2019. Yeah, basically how she then she chose that path then to become a social activist in her community, and she believes in love and justice and peace. A non-violent protester. And yeah, so we were talking about, is there something to be done with children's books that could be some kind of solidarity series? Could we raise money to help bring solar energy to Shatila? So I think in one way that might be conceived as a political act, but I also think maybe there's something we can do with the picture book and sharing stories and combining those with I wouldn't really say a political agenda, but a human agenda. So yeah, that's my mixture of thoughts on how to scale up to political aspirations. And I hope it answered your question.
Hi, Kate. I think how to scale up. I think the way that I've always written and drawn for young adults, because I think, first of all, people don't see young people that much, and nothing is really written in a real way, or often isn't written in a real way for people who are like 18 and under, or especially between 14 and 18. And it feels like if you can reach those people and help and have them care about things that they didn't, that they might not have cared about, that they didn't know about, if people don't feel so alone, then they have more of a stake in the community and the world around them. And it's maybe like a more longer reaching goal, that if you're a young person and you realize like, oh, that person who was 15 who walked here from Guatemala, you know, they like books and so do I, and they fought with their brother and so did I, and they love their mother and so do I, and maybe we're not so, you know, we're different, but like we have these similar experiences and these emotions, and this is a person. And so as I grow up, I'm going to vote and I'm going to do something different, or I'm going to actually do something because I can, and I'm going to try and make a difference. And there are kids in my school, and now I see them in a way that I didn't see them. And so that's going to change me, and it's going to change them, and it's going to be this ripple effect that will then bubble up. And that if we keep doing things like that, if we all can take these small acts of storytelling and narrative, it's such a powerful tool to change how people think and view themselves and the people around them, that then, you know, maybe it feels a little naive, but then you can actually make the world a better place. I hope that, yeah.
I don't know, Kate, what do you have a response to the responses?
Oh, no, thank you. I was really interested in the range of them. I think it's this thing about when you're gifted with stories, and what our responsibility therefore is to storytellers. And if we ourselves feel that the politics of the moment, who gets to take that forward? So we hold the publication at the end, and what is our responsibility to shift, to change? And is it enough that, how do we promote this? You know, I'm here attending this to try and hear more about what's being shared, but how do you push things out? And actually also the power of arts to change things, and these pieces of work but how do you then keep that at a grassroots level? Because in a sense you hold a document, you are just like, you know, all of these things. I mean, I may write a paper, I might produce a film, I might produce I've toured exhibitions, all sorts of things, but all of them have had some element of not just, but seeing the deeply personal as political. So that kind of old idea that we're not necessarily talking party politics when we, although I think it's very interesting to imagine that you might get your MPs and politicians to engage in different ways, because all of us enjoy hearing stories and receiving information in different forms. So but I think some of it's about responsibility of all of us, and our sense of power in the moment as well within our communities, what we can do with what we're gifted with, that many people that engage with us can't therefore take forward, or if we can actually do it together, how we do that. So I thank you, all three of you. They were really interesting and beautiful answers. So yeah, thank you, Ambrose.
Before you go, Kate, how would you answer your own questions? The questions that you're asking?
I think there's always a tension between who you are engaging with the communities that you're part of, and so who therefore, so vehicles, so your responsibility lies first and foremost, I think, to the communities that are participating, or the individuals who share their stories, always. So therefore, our political responses have to come. So for example, as well, I don't know, thinking about Santok's work around housing, and most of my work's in asylum as well, but actually feeling that that it's sometimes deeply challenging for individuals within communities, stigmatized as it is, vulnerable as you are to immigration laws and removal orders and housing instability and, you know, poverty. The complex situation means that people can't always raise their stories upwards, but actually I can. I don't fear that I'm going to be detained and removed or deported, you know. So that would be a political position that I would take. But if you don't do it with the will of the people that you're working with or alongside, it's really problematic. I think you get into other tensions as to whose voices you're extracting and taking forward without consent. So those were the kind of ideas that I was looking to grapple with. But in some ways, everyone answered it really differently and with a different richness that wouldn't necessarily be how I'd respond. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And I don't know if we've got another question. Charles, do you want to say something?
I am not sure because my toddler is around, so I am like listening, like yeah, he's coming. But thank you for the talk, and yeah, sorry, and I just left for Tracy some. I think her work is really inspiring me to draw and to become or to want to become a comic artist. So thank you, Tracy. Nothing else. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I suppose since we've got 5 minutes before the session ends, we go back to our speakers. And do you have end notes or final comments, anything that you would like to emphasize? And also, what are your hopes? We'll start with Tracy, Helen, and then finish with Santo.
Well, my hope is that unaccompanied refugee minors are supported and that these stories make a difference. And I don't think that any child should have to go through what they go through and what children all over the world are going through in the moment when in this adult world. And it really is heartbreaking for me all the time when I think about all the children all over the world at any moment who are living in an adult world that is violent toward them. I definitely believe that narrative has the power to make a positive change in the world. And it feels like in talking to everyone here, I'm now I went from like broken heart to warm heart because all the things that you all are doing are so amazing and are reaching people and changing people. And it is such a great medium for that. My book, I'm gonna put in the chat. This is my website, so it has some information. My book also has a study guide because it's meant to be used in schools and to support teachers in teaching high school students and sort of 8th grade and up, so that's 14 and up. And it can also be used for discussion points. And as I said before, any book that is sold, all the author's profits go back to the organizations that support unaccompanied refugee minors. And thank you again for having me here and for this discussion. I've really learned a lot from everybody.
Oh, thanks so much, Tracy. Also sharing the book. And your website, I can't wait to share it with a friend down in Texas. Started teaching at a new high school. I know she's got unaccompanied, well, she's got asylum seeking teenagers in her class. I was just wondering if the book is translated into other languages.
So I think it's going to be translated into Spanish, but that's for next year right now.
Yeah. Perfect. Good to know. Yeah, I mean, it's just been so lovely to hear everyone and talk about the power of stories. It's always just, I think, good to think about the value of art, and I think this has always been something yeah, somehow the two things, I think the caring act of creating something, all the care that goes into an illustration, cartoon, writing, a piece of writing, I think sort of finding ways to harness that kind of caring, loving work with caring, supportive, loving work, social work is really beautiful, and I feel so privileged in my life to be able to do that. Yeah, and I guess just to say, you know, I think it's as Tracy says, and we've mentioned a bit about community today. I think it would just be my hope is just to see and hear more about more initiatives, and more of these kinds of very warm celebrations also of all the different facets of people. So maybe moving away from moving away from narratives that don't necessarily share the integrity of people. So initiatives that help promote artistic scholarship and artistic opportunities for young people. Yeah, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful to see more of that, and to see more resources like Tracy's and Santok's, and maybe just to have, it'd be wonderful to have like more kind of like maybe online spaces where people could meet and talk about and share their work or share their updates, whether that's just as simple as connecting now after the call, or if there were more spaces like this. So thanks, Ambrose, for creating such a wonderful space. It's really great to be part of it, and thanks so much for the really amazing insights. Can't wait to do some reading of your materials.
Everyone, it's been a pleasure to meet you all and be a part of this. So thanks, Ambrose, to kind of reaching out and bringing us all together. I appreciate that. I think in terms of who I am, it doesn't go away, and I think for me, whether it's teaching, whether it's involved in research like this, that kind of provides different forms of outputs, that kind of provides a platform for voices to be heard. The importance is to have to kind of encourage compassion, because we need more of that. You know, we need people to understand that we're all part of humanity. Whatever it takes, you know, I sound like I'm off one of those American movies there, but you know, it sounds like, but you know, I'm a Marvel fan as well, so we shouldn't go in there. But yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, we're not at a level playing field out there. You know, people have different opportunities, and there's a lot of inequality out there. And unless that starts changing, you know, we need to do what we can. And it goes from what Kate was saying, we need to do what we can in the positions we're in to kind of create compassion, support compassion, a sense of humanity, and sort of a greater sense of equality as well. So I hope I continue to do that in different ways, and I hope I can contribute to things like this to kind of help support that. So thank you all. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Santok, and thank you to everyone who attended this session. We've been listening to Helen Patuk, a creative consultant to the UN, an illustrator and children's author from the UK, who founded the non-profit Katibna, Our Book, in 2014. Helen has written and illustrated books themed around displacement and uses storytelling to co-create books with children affected by conflict and forced migration to share their voices through the picture book form. Katibna itself has collaborated with civil society, NGOs, and UN agencies in Lebanon, Iraq, Kurdistan, Jordan, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Turkey, and Libya, working directly with refugee and IDP children to share their voices. Her work in the UK has focused on creating welcoming bilingual children's books for Syrian families resettled in Northern Ireland, under the UK government's Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Schemes. Katibna's 2023 work in Armenia and Poland aims to support psychologists helping children affected by the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in an AHRC-funded collaboration with Cardiff University and Ukrainian children in institutional care in partnership with Save the Children. Tracy White is a cartoonist and teacher at New York University, where she teaches how to write and draw comics. She believes stories can change the world. 100% of her author's profits go to organizations that support unaccompanied refugee minors. A graphic novel, Unaccompanied, Stories of Brave Teenagers Seeking Asylum, is about 5 strong, amazing young children. And as Tracy has just pointed out, she thinks of them as superheroes who left their homes and communities to risk the incredibly dangerous journey walking to the US border to seek asylum. Once in the US, a whole other journey begins through the immigration system. This book includes further reading and a study guide. Our third speaker, Santo Gill, is a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Huddersfield. Transitions: A Story of Refugee Lives is a comic book about people's experiences after being granted refugee status. The book is based on a study undertaken between January 2021 and December 2022 by researchers at the university. The stories presented in the comic book reflect the experiences the researchers had from refugees during the study. The events depicted in the book are real events, but drawn from a number of different refugee participants. The research was conducted as part of Refugee Integration Yorkshire and Humber, and was co-funded by the European Union Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. So on that note, please join me in thanking our speakers again. And our third session in the series starts at 6 p.m. We'll still use the same link and on that note, I say thank you and have a brilliant rest of the evening for those who are leaving the call. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.